Joining me now, Jesse Powell, CEO of Kraken. Jesse, great to see you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you again.
A lot to talk about. Crypto is very much in the global conversation right now. What do you think the role of cryptocurrencies are right now on the global stage, particularly with everything that's going on between Russia and Ukraine right now?
Yeah, I think we're really starting to see the true use case of Bitcoin for the world. Just a few weeks ago, we had a great example in Canada, an example that we didn't think we would see in the Western world. I think gave people something to pay attention to other than the price. An actual use case where Canada sanctioned its own citizens and they were shut off from their bank accounts, and some people had to turn to Bitcoin as the rail of last resort to pay their bills during that time. And now with Russia, the Russian people have lost half of their net worth, half of the value of their currency. There are runs on ATMs in Russia and Ukraine, and people are turning to Bitcoin as, again, this financial rail of last resort that doesn't depend on the legacy banking system to serve them, which often hits these bottlenecks and can't perform under extreme pressure.
And do you think that's helping the price of Bitcoin? We've seen it go up significantly in the face of what's going on, while the rest of U.S. equities, at least, were falling yesterday. Is that helping the bull case for Bitcoin?
We've looked at the numbers, and we don't think the growth in the price is so much due to buyers in Russia and Ukraine, so much as it is the example that's being set with Bitcoin and the use case that's being proven out of Bitcoin, and people becoming more bullish as the world becomes more volatile.
Got it. So not necessarily demand from those places, but it is helping sort of the sentiment around the asset class.
That's right.
And there have been requests from government officials in Ukraine, at least. There was a tweet, for example, by the Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine asking crypto exchanges to block addresses of all Russian users. Kraken has said, no, you guys are not doing that. Why not?
That's right. I mean, we don't take a position around the world against ordinary citizens. We do, of course, follow the standard financial services regulations, the OFAC sanctions. We're closely following executive orders from the White House. And where we are required to do so legally, we will freeze the accounts of any individual identified, or should the State Department or OFAC roll out sanctions countrywide like they have in Iran or North Korea, then of course we would be compelled to comply with that. But as far as sanctioning individuals, we haven't seen that work very well. I mean, as a private company, there would potentially be repercussions for us doing that voluntarily. Once you go to freeze someone's financial account, they're no longer able to pay their rent, pay their debts, buy food, support their family. It's a pretty extreme measure, and it's far beyond turning off someone's access to their music streaming service or, their photo sharing app. Shutting off someone's financial access, we take very seriously, and generally only do that at the request of a government agency, with the formal legal requirement to do so. And we don't believe that, the majority of Russian people support this invasion. And, the United States as well has been involved in numerous military conflicts around the world. I think most people in the United States would not support those actions. And so, I'm happy that as an American citizen, when we invaded Iraq and we invaded Afghanistan, that I didn't have my bank account turned off and my brokerage account seized, because I don't have anything to do with that. And I think ordinary Russian citizens, either they don't know what's happening, they don't support what's happening, or they're being subjected to a tremendous amount of propaganda inside the country and just don't know what to believe. And I think to put additional pressure on those people removes the ability for them to fight internally for what they believe in, removes their ability to leave the country if they feel like things aren't going the way that they like anymore. They don't believe in the regime anymore. So it's a pretty extreme measure for us to take. And we obviously don't have all the information that the State Department has or other countries have about the situation. And so it's a bit too far, I think, for us to go and impose sanctions on individual users really without the requirement to do so.
And what would be the big ask from regulators? Is there anything that the U.S. or global regulators could say that would require Kraken to really change that stance?
Sure. I mean, they could do what they've done for Iran or North Korea and roll out, through legal process, these embargoes or countrywide sanctions. And we would, of course, be compelled to comply with those rules as a regulated financial service and as a company who's headquartered in the United States.
I think a lot of people hear sanctions on Russia and assume that that does apply to the regular citizen there. What is the distinction? Can you sort of describe that to our audience who might think that despite sanctions, why are you still able to operate there when you might not be able to operate in other countries like Iran or North Korea, for example?
Yeah, so I mean, it's really up to the government how far they want to go with the sanctions. I think we didn't have the kind of economic connections to Iran or North Korea that we have with Russia. So that might be one driving force. Obviously, we're buying a lot of energy from Russia, and that has explicitly been exempted from the sanctions. So, Russia's currently free to spend their energy as a currency. It's just that the Russian banking system, the central bank, many of their banks have been excluded from the SWIFT system, which is the system of international payments and wire transfers. And so their banking system effectively has been cut off from the rest of the world. They've also identified several, high-ranking political figures as people who've been targeted for sanctions. But, the individual people generally are free to continue transacting with the rest of the world.
Kraken and a lot of the global exchanges are subject to some of the same restrictions and regulations as banks for the most part. Yet there's been a lot of talk about cryptocurrencies as a possible way to get around sanctions. Is that possible? And is there really a way that some in Russia could use exchanges to really skirt sanctions? Is that a viable concern?
Well, I mean, in the case of Russia, we're talking about the central bank and, the banks, which I think, any meaningful amount of money to them could not be moved through cryptocurrency. I mean, they're not liquid ruble markets. So, even if they were able to, they'd have to convert that to dollars somehow first and get into the dollar markets. Obviously, they're currently prevented from moving money around the world through their banking system. So I think it would be extremely difficult for them to move any kind of meaningful amount of money through cryptocurrency at this point. It's also extremely traceable. And I think it would be pretty clear through the tools that are available where this money is originating from and where it's going. And if at any point that money touched a sanctioned individual or country, it would have to be frozen according to, the rules that are in place now.
So Kraken would be the one to have to freeze that account. Is that right?
If it came through our platform, that's right.
Right. Senator Warren and other Democrats yesterday wrote a letter to Janet Yellen in the Treasury Department about the possibility of cryptocurrencies and their role in potentially getting around sanctions. Why do you think they're so worried, if that's the case, and if exchanges are cooperating with global regulators?
I think it's a misunderstanding, really. I think a lot of politicians don't understand how cryptocurrency works. They don't understand how regulated the space already is. I think they have this perspective of 10 years ago when it was a very nascent technology. And, it's come a long way, and it's a regular part of life for tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people today. And it's a heavily regulated industry, and it's heavily traceable. And I think politicians just haven't caught up with where we really are, and they have an outdated view of the whole situation.
So it does seem like people are looking to cryptocurrencies as a store of value. One side of that is stable coins and cryptocurrencies like Tether, anything really pegged to the price of the dollar. What are you seeing in terms of demand when it comes to coins like Tether?
Yeah, generally, people tend to convert back into these stable coins, quote unquote stable coins, in times of high volatility, when they want to sit out the market, they don't want to hold a position in a particular cryptocurrency. And rather than going back into real traditional US dollars, which we also support, they hold the stable coin because the coin gives them more flexibility. For example, if they want to move the coin between different crypto platforms, they're able to do that very quickly. On a Saturday night when the wire transfer system is closed, you can move USDT or USDC from one exchange to another in a matter of minutes. And that gives you a lot more flexibility and convenience than exists in the traditional financial system, not to mention the fees are much less. So I think people tend to stay in those stable coins just because it's a better version of dollars for for their life.
So you said quote unquote stable coins. Is there anything about the backing of things like Tether and some of the transparency there that gets you worried?
Generally these coins are not pallets of physical cash sitting in a vault. So it's generally not like directly one-to-one tokenized dollars. The issuers of these stable coins might be keeping the dollars in other forms, bonds, treasuries. They might even be taking other low risk investments with it. And it's conceivable that they will lose money at some point that they have invested, either through getting hacked or through, the investments that they've made performing poorly. So they have a bunch of controls in place, to mitigate that, and they're able to freeze coins as well. If they find that coins have been stolen, they have the ability to remotely freeze an account on the blockchain. So it frees certain coins. So I think it's pretty low risk, but it's just definitely not just dollar bills sitting in a vault.
That's one thing that regulators have talked about in terms of financial stability. Is there any risk that there could eventually be something like a run on the bank when it comes to one of these stable coins? If they don't, have proper backing, for example.
That's conceivable. Yeah. I don't really see that happening. I mean, people would want to turn their stable coins back into dollars in a bank account. It's highly unlikely that at least today, the holders of stable coins would want to go back from what is basically like the best currency, like, a digital form of the dollar back into a physical form of the dollar. And it just seems unlikely the way that the direction of things are going, which is more and more businesses are starting to accept USDT and USDC as a direct alternative to a wire transfer. And so I see the demand for these stable coins just increasing over time.
So you mentioned USDT, USDC as well, issued by Circle. Both have grown in popularity. Is a central bank digital currency necessary at this point, based on the popularity and use cases of other private stablecoins? Do you think people would actually use a CBDC?
Yeah, it's a good question for the Federal Reserve. And I know a lot of countries are exploring this possibility of a sort of central bank coin or a Fed coin. Whether they will do it, whether they can offer any significant advantage over something like USDC, or if it's just better for them to outsource this to partners like USDC or like USDT, or even the big banks. You could imagine a Bank of America coin, a JP Morgan coin, and these presumably would be interchangeable. I think that that's an easy way to do it versus having the government try to run this technology themselves. I think that it's also a little bit scary to imagine a single digital currency with the kind of controls that USDC has being run by the central bank, and what that would mean for cases where, it might lead to the elimination of cash. It might lead to any authoritarian government that would run such a program, would basically have complete control to freeze anyone's account at any time, basically. And we've seen this happen without due process. In the case of Canada, accounts being frozen for being suspected of being involved in a protest or for serving coffee to people in the protest. So it could be dangerous depending on how it's implemented. I think a lot of people are resistant to the idea of a central bank digital currency because of the controls and the lack of transparency that would, the level of transparency that would be there. But I think it's coming.
We talked a lot about Russia. I would love to get your take on what happened in Canada with the trucker protests there. You mentioned some of the crypto accounts that were shut down, and you had warned consumers on Twitter that in Canada, you can't necessarily safeguard people's accounts in that case. Walk me through Kraken's stance there and the situation in Canada.
Sure. I mean, I don't think the company took a position on this, but I personally was recommending to people that if they thought that they were in danger of having their account frozen by the government, that they should take their coins into their own custody, which is something great about cryptocurrency. You don't have to stuff cash under the mattress anymore. You can hold cryptocurrency in a wallet that you control on your phone or on another device that other people don't have access to. And the scary thing about the sanctions in Canada were that it just happened without any ability for the people to push back or to defend their account. It was just broad sweeping. They sent out a list of names and said, like, shut off these accounts. And there was no chance to say, wait a minute, you made a mistake. You had your account turned off, and then it was up to you with no money left to try to find a lawyer or somehow contest this and get your money back. And, as we know, like, the legal system could take a long time to process that. And how are you going to get a lawyer to help you when you don't have any money? All your money's been frozen. So pretty scary situation for people to be in. I always recommend that if they're afraid of their government, or if they're afraid of their account being frozen without any sort of due process, that they take that money out so that they have something if and when that time comes, that they're not completely dependent on a bank or, somebody else holding their money that could just refuse to give their money back at any time.
Big difference between holding it on an exchange and cold storage. I do want to go back to the conflict in Eastern Europe for a minute. We've seen a lot of crowdfunding and support for the Ukrainian military with cryptocurrency. Is that a growing use case, crowdfunding versus crypto as a payment method, for example?
Yeah, for sure. I think we are going to see more crowdfunding through cryptocurrencies. It's a fantastic way to raise a lot of money quickly. Apparently, it's been very successful in just the last few months. We've seen a tremendous amount of growth of crowdfunding activity, especially around political issues. And historically, the payment processors have been roped into these political disputes and been forced to take a side. And I think not always on the right side. And once people are kind of shut off from the financial system, and don't have the ability to support the causes that they care about, I feel like that's basically tantamount to removing free speech. If you can't finance your protest, you can't really have a protest. And so I think it's important that people be able to finance those things, and especially when they're being done peacefully or in response to an invasion, for example, when other rails may not be available. Like I mentioned earlier, the banks are closed on the weekend. You can't get a wire across on Saturday night, and so cryptocurrency is a way that you can get money across the world in a matter of seconds, 24/7, 365, without anybody stepping in the middle of that transaction and saying, no, you can't do this. So it's a perfect way to get money directly from individual to individual, directly to the people that need it, without having to worry about like who's holding the money in the meantime or how they're going to distribute it.
Exchanges are sort of a middleman. You're really a bridge between the old world monetary system and economy and this new crypto and digital economy. What are your conversations like with global regulators? We talked to Sam Bankman-Fried a couple of weeks ago. He said that they're constantly talking to regulators. The FBI in certain cases are reaching out to them and flagging certain accounts. What are your conversations like when it comes to policing the exchanges?
Oh, yeah, we're constantly engaged with regulators. Kraken is more than 10 years old now. So we've been around for a long time. Last year, we had 2,500 law enforcement requests, 50 of those from the SEC, over 700 from the FBI. They come from all over the world, and we do our best to process those in a timely fashion. But law enforcement, I think, is increasingly catching on. Last year was up 130% over the year before. So the pace of inquiries coming to crypto exchanges, I think, is just increasing at a tremendous pace. And law enforcement's getting increasingly clever and aware of how they can use this system and all the traceability of crypto to track people down that they're looking for that are involved in crimes.
Got it. Yeah, the traceability is really interesting. I wonder, have you seen instances where somebody uses a cryptocurrency either to launder money or commit some sort of crime, where they were busted on Kraken or one of these other exchanges because law enforcement was able to actually trace where the money was going?
Absolutely. I mean, actually, it happens on a regular basis. And, I would say to all the criminals out there, you're dumb if you try to launder your money through Kraken, because we're just so actively engaged with law enforcement. Just in the last couple of weeks, there have been a few big cases of exchange hacks being discovered. Like years later, we found out who the hackers were for billions of dollars. And law enforcement was able to trace through the years, these movements of funds, and all it takes is one slip up at any time in the future to be able to kind of unravel your whole history and identify you. And it's got to be a really scary thing for criminals trying to launder a significant amount of money. We've just seen people, slip up years later and get caught. And so it's really not a great way to try to launder money, and people get busted all the time.
Got it. So harder than it might sound to commit a crime with crypto. What about government uses of Bitcoin? We've seen El Salvador really emerge as a Bitcoin experiment on the global stage. Do you think that will continue in terms of sovereign governments using Bitcoin as legal tender?
I think so. Yeah, I know some other countries are exploring this and looking at Bitcoin as an option. Some countries aren't even operating on their own currency. They may be operating on another country's currency, and they might be better off using something that's neutral and international and not controlled by a political entity, not something that can be weaponized against them. And so I think it's attractive for a number of reasons. Obviously, Bitcoin has performed extremely well over the last decade compared to the dollar, for example, which the number we were told is 7.5% inflation. Just in the last year, I think it's probably a lot higher than that. When we go to the supermarket or the gas station, it looks a lot higher than that. So it's increasingly looking like a great asset and a great currency, a great store of value for countries, especially where they might not have a very stable currency themselves.
What about volatility? Stocks, for the record, right now are trading a lot like Bitcoin and have been pretty volatile. But do you expect volatility for cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin in particular to reduce as it becomes more mainstream?
I do think it'll reduce the more adoption that we have. The question is always like, okay, Bitcoin's up and down 10% every week, but where else are you going to go? What's the stock market doing? Is the stock market any better? What's your national currency doing? Is that any better? And I mean, if we just look at the long-term chart of Bitcoin, it's just outperforming everything else in the world. And so, I would say, like, if you're worried about paying your rent in 2 weeks, you probably don't want to be keeping all of your money in Bitcoin. I think figure out how much you can afford to lose. And, as a long-term store of value, I think Bitcoin is a great investment. I think as a short-term store of value, it's extremely volatile, and I wouldn't, it could move 50% in either direction in the next 2 weeks. No one knows. So, invest accordingly.
I want to ask you about the environmental impact when it comes to Bitcoin mining. Some have said that that's overblown. Do you agree? And if it is an environmental issue, how can that be fixed? How can that be improved for Bitcoin mining?
I do think it is an environmental issue in that it greatly subsidizes the cost of renewable and green energy. We're seeing so much energy be wasted that if Bitcoin just captured this wasted energy, I mean, we couldn't even use all the wasted energy on Bitcoin mining today. And so we're paying for a lot of energy production that just ends up being wasted right now. There's a lot of flaring. That's bad for the environment. It'd be better to capture that and use it for something like mining. So I think there's this misconception that Bitcoin somehow is stealing energy away from the grid or causing us to use up more barrels of oil or something like that. And the reality is we have all of this electricity that we're just producing during the night that's just going to waste. That if Bitcoin could capture that during the night when it's not being used by anybody else, and it's not just going to waste, that means the cost of energy during the day can be less. So I think it will have an environmental impact in that it's going to help us get to more clean energy faster. And I think the claims of it being bad for the environment are just way overblown and misunderstand this kind of dynamic with how Bitcoin is subsidizing clean energy.
What about proof of stake as an alternative for cryptocurrencies? Ethereum is moving in that direction. Is that a viable alternative? And do you think it's as secure as proof of work?
Well, it's a different model. And I think it's yet to be seen if long-term it's something that will work as well as Bitcoin has. Bitcoin's got a 10-year run with proof of work, 13 years with proof of work. Ethereum's planning to move to a proof of stake system. That would be like the next biggest network. And that would be a pretty good test for proof of stake. The criticism of that is that, it basically becomes like a share voting system. And, there's some concern that over time that voting share could become consolidated. I think it probably depends. The risks there depend on the network and the distribution of ownership of the network and those voting shares. But it does have some trade-offs, and I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
So Web3 is another buzzword really that we've heard in the last year or so. Some have talked about it as the future of the internet. Are you as excited as some others are when it comes to applications being built on blockchain, whether it's decentralized finance or video games being built on blockchain? What's your take on Web3?
So there's a lot of stuff in Web3 and DeFi. It's, decentralized financial services. It's, removing the middlemen on things like financial contracts. It's decentralized exchange of assets and conversions between assets. It's also this tokenization of everything, having things that exist, maybe in real life, that have a token that go along with them as a proof of provenance and ownership and authenticity. It's virtual goods inside virtual worlds that are portable between different virtual worlds. It can be file storage, in a decentralized way that sort of can survive, any particular credit card, going offline, for example. You could post something and pay for it into the future and have it just be there out hosted on a decentralized platform. So there's lots of exciting stuff. Today we're really in the early days. We're building all these components of things. And I think the next decade is really going to be about seeing how all these components fit together to build this new world of just the tokenized system and things existing without middlemen into the metaverse.
Could that be a threat to Kraken's business at any point? If you're seeing these decentralized exchanges and that lack of a middleman, is there a point where that could, start taking some market share from Kraken?
I think to some extent, yes. However, from my perspective, personal philosophy, it's a good problem to have. I think it means that the world is moving forward and we're advancing as a civilization. But, we're so plugged into the legacy financial system, and we do so much as a centralized exchange that you can't really get out of a decentralized exchange. We see ourselves more as like a portal to all this stuff. And so we can provide a layer of customer service. We can provide some synergies by doing so many things all in one place, by tying a bunch of different networks together in a way that they're not technically atomically kind of connected right now. So, for example, if you wanted to trade Ethereum for Solana, you could do that directly on Kraken. You can't really do that easily through the blockchain right now because these are two isolated networks. So there's some advantages that centralized services will continue to have like long into the future. But ultimately, we hope to become a portal for that kind of stuff and be able to support our users engaging in DeFi and Web3 through Kraken.
And what is the business model? A lot of it, I would think, is trading. How does Kraken make money?
A lot of it is trading. That's how we got our start. Staking is becoming an increasingly bigger part of our business. We're also developing an NFT platform. And we'll be getting into lending and some other yield generating products into the future. So it's really becoming more of a holistic financial services platform that's trying to stay on the bleeding edge of what's happening in crypto and continuing to expose those crypto opportunities to our clients.
We've seen this happen in traditional equities with the brokerage firms in the last decade or so, really going to zero commissions. Do you see that phenomenon playing out with crypto and fees going down? And at some point, your industry seeing some pressure on margins?
Yeah, I think eventually over time that will happen. But, I think that the large players in this space are also becoming increasingly diversified in how they generate revenue. And so I do think fees will come down over time. But I also think the pie is still continuing to grow a lot. And, we don't think most people are not very price sensitive right now. I mean, the fees are extremely low compared to the volatility of the market. If you're talking about 0.1% on a trade of an asset that's moving 10% every day, it's sort of meaningless in the grand scheme of things. And Right now the exchanges are all really reinvesting all of this revenue back into marketing and growth and security and continuing to support the ecosystem through a lot of research and development. And so, in a way, this is all getting kind of reinvested back in the ecosystem. I don't think many exchanges are just sort of pocketing all this cash. Everyone's heavily reinvesting.
Coinbase is obviously the public comparison for any crypto exchange. Does Kraken have any plans to go public at this point?
Yeah, we're working toward being able to go public when we think the time is right. We're not sure when we'll pull the trigger on that, but it's definitely something we're working toward.
Got it. Well, we'll keep an eye out. Any thoughts on listing in the US versus listing on some of the other exchanges globally, and some of the pros and cons of being a US listed company?
Yeah, I mean, for now, it's still the US just has the most exposure to the rest of the world. I think it's still seen as the leading market for securities. It's heavily regulated. I think investors appreciate that to some degree. We're still looking at the US as the top option to become publicly listed. There are many other geos in the world that we could do it sooner. But we're not in a rush either. The US is what we're looking at most closely right now.
So what about regulation? There's been calls for more clarity out of Washington. What would be your ideal scenario? And what is the industry looking for out of Congress when it comes to that clarity that people have been really clamoring for in the industry?
Yeah, right now there's a lot of uncertainty, and there are a lot of regulations around crypto. In some ways, crypto is over-regulated and I think unfairly regulated. And in some ways, there's a lot of gray area. And that gray area has been exploited by regulators. I mean, you see the SEC making claims like anything could be a security. We could just decide at any time that we're going to call anything a security and come after anyone who's been trading anything for the last decade. That kind of stuff is scary. And what we've seen with the Ripple case, they came after Ripple 8 years later. And so not having clarity around that, being able to understand like what is a security and what isn't. And, we're looking at laws that are 80 years old, talking about orange groves, that even like predate the internet, that never imagined the internet or even anything remotely close to cryptocurrencies. It's really hard. We're trying to fit this new world into, ancient regulations. And I think it's really hard for the regulators to work with this. I think it really is going to come down to the legislature to draw the line and explicitly say who regulates what and how to kind of qualify these things or characterize these things, given all the advances we've had in technology, and just acknowledge that these are not the same things as like orange trees.
Got it. Great point about the securities laws. I think there's a lot of people that would agree with you there. What about the U.S. in terms of a crypto capital? Are you seeing other places emerge as a more friendly place to do business for the industry?
The U.S. is relatively friendly. I don't think it's the crypto capital because I think, the use case in the United States so far has largely been speculation. Other countries have more serious use cases, where they have a very volatile national currency, like Venezuela, for example. Cryptocurrencies being used by real people to do real things, who don't have access to all the financial tools that we have here in the United States. They may not have credit cards or an ability to pay for something online. They may not have a bank account with international wire access. They may not have access to credit. They may not even have access to any form of regulated financial services because maybe they were born in a place where they didn't get a birth certificate, and now they're not able to prove to a financial institution who they are, and therefore not able to get an account. So there are a lot of people excluded from the financial system around the world, or who have been sort of abused by the financial system, and people are using cryptocurrency as an alternative to that system or as a rail of last resort for real life reasons, for remittances, for stores of value that outperform their national currency, which is undergoing hyperinflation. So many parts of the world where I think there's a lot more exciting stuff happening than the United States.
Jesse, thanks so much. We'll have to leave it there. Fascinating time for crypto and for Kraken. Thank you so much for joining us. Jesse Powell, CEO of Kraken.